Hi, I'm David Barr Kirtley, host of the Geek's Guide to the Galaxy podcast. The following conversation originally appeared in episode 114 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. To learn more, visit us at geeksguideshow.com. And for our panel today, we'll be discussing the original Nintendo Entertainment System, and I'm joined by three guest geeks. So first up, we've got my longtime co-host, John Joseph Adams. He's the editor and publisher of Lightspeed and Nightmare magazines, and the series editor of Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. He's also the editor of various anthologies, including Press Start to Play, an upcoming book of short fiction inspired by video games. So John, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Then next up, we've got Allison Hayslip. She's an actress and TV personality who's appeared on G4, NBC, Nerdist, and The Nerd Machine, as well as in various film and TV projects including Battleground, Saturn Returns, Video Games the Movie, and the Team Unicorn Saturday Action Fun Hour. So Allison, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me too.
And finally, we've got Blake J. Harris, author of the recent book Console Wars, Sega, Nintendo, and the Battle That Defined a Generation. He's currently co-directing a documentary based on the book, and will also serve as executive producer for an upcoming feature film adaptation from Sony. So Blake, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and so the first thing I want to talk about is just our earliest memories of the NES and how we first encountered it. So I'll just start. So I used to go to a pizza place downtown every Friday with my parents where I would play the Super Mario Brothers arcade machine. And I really loved it, but they would only give me 50 cents to play it, so I didn't get very far. And then at some point later, I was down at a friend's house who lived on my street, and I just walked in and he was playing The Legend of Zelda. And, you start out with kind of this brown sword, and then if you go north a little bit, you walk up this long staircase into this cave, and you get this white sword that's more powerful. And I walked in right as he was doing that, and I was just like, oh my god, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then he showed me Duck Hunt, and he showed me Super Mario Brothers, and, it looked exactly like the arcade. I was just blown away. And because, prior to that, there would just be the Atari, and it looked nothing like the arcades. It looked really terrible. So just the idea that I could play the arcade Super Mario Brothers on my TV was just really, really amazing to me. So how about Allison? Why don't you tell us, how did you first encounter the Nintendo Entertainment System?
I would like to say that I thought those swords in Legend of Zelda, the brown sword was a wooden sword, and the white sword was a steel sword, right? They weren't the colors. That's what I pictured in my 8-bit mind.
But how can you kill a monster with a wooden sword? That would take forever.
Because they were lame monsters, and that's what it did take forever. You only knocked off like a quarter heart or whatever. It's funny that you said the thing about the pizza place too, because I used to go, there was a Pizza Hut that was not close to where I lived. It was a very special treat when we got to go to Pizza Hut. And I loved going there because they had a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade machine there. And I could care less about eating the pizza. I just played the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game forever. But my earliest Nintendo memory is, I believe I was 8, and it was Christmas, and I opened up a big box, and I got the Nintendo Power System with Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, and that, Olympic track game with the power pad and all that. Mm-hmm. And I lost my mind. We have it on VHS. It's the greatest thing ever. And I also was given the DuckTales game, and that was the first game I ever completed.
And how about Blake? What was your first experience with the NES?
Despite being a Jewish individual, my first experience is a Christmas memory. And my brother and I unwrapped the Nintendo Entertainment System. I think it was Christmas 1988. And I remember opening it up and feeling so excited and so powerful, and also simultaneously feeling like I don't even really know what this is. I just knew everybody wanted this. This was the it thing. But the concept of video games, I don't think even fully made sense to me until we got home that night and hooked it up and spent the rest of the night playing it. And that's the main thing that I loved about the NES, is that almost all of my Nintendo stories start with Wii, because that was kind of the only thing that kept me and my younger brother civil with one another during these years, though it did lead off into many fights. But so all my earliest memories are with him, and definitely brings a smile to my face to discuss them all these years later.
And John?
Yeah, I mean, I was a video game player like since I can even remember. When I was a real little kid, we had the Atari 2600, as so many of us did, and then after that, I had like a VIC-20 computer and then a Commodore 64. So in between like the Atari 2600 and the NES, I was like playing video games like the whole time. Like even after the Atari had sort of went away and nobody was playing Atari, I was playing games on the Commodore 64. And so like in retrospect, I'm looking at it, it's like, how the hell did the Nintendo Entertainment System exist? And I didn't know about it for like 4 years or something. Because I mean, like I can remember first playing it when I was like 12 or 13, and like you were saying, Dave, it's like a friend of mine had it, and it was like my mind was blown. And I can't remember what game in particular, but I know we definitely played a lot of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, and that was like I think that was the first game that I actually played on it, and we played it over at his house, and because it was a good game that you could play together, and play against each other and stuff, or at least I think you can. Could you? Actually, now that I'm saying that, I don't know if you could.
Yeah.
Because
that sounds
it was
a little fictional, but
yeah. No, so we must have just played it and taken turns, beating up all the different characters. Yeah, because it wasn't the sort of fighting game that you could actually fight each other. You only could fight the bad guy.
But I think you make kind of a good point, though, just in that, like, my favorite memories are not even really playing the NES. It's usually, like, watching other people play or feeling like,
oh, yeah,
we were part of this team trying to defeat these things that, like, where do they come from? What are we doing?
and so, following the strategy guides and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like, my friends had, my best friend when I was growing up he was one of 5 kids, and so they're always fighting for the NES. And one thing you could do with Super Mario Brothers is if you pause the game using the second controller, Mario would lose all his momentum. So if you wait until your brother jumped over a pit and then paused the game and then unpaused it, he would just drop straight down into the pit.
Oh my gosh, I never knew that.
Wow.
Wait, did you guys know? I only learned this like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But when you're playing Duck Hunt, if you plug the gun into player 1, if you plugged a controller into player 2, another person could control the duck.
What?
Yes.
No way.
I'm serious.
I knew that. I used to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
You can't stop the duck from going up, but you can make it go back and forth however you want it to. It's insane. And it's like, why would you ever know that? It never said it in the instruction guide. It's like someone just figured that out somehow.
So how did you find that out finally, like years later?
Someone told me, like in a conversation, I was like, you're fucking with me. That's not true. Why would I not know that? And he's like, try it out. And like the next time I was around an old Nintendo, I tried it and I was like, oh my God, what? It's like, why didn't we know this 20 years ago?
Well, I mean, Blake, you said that it seems like everybody had an NES, and it certainly seemed that way to me. I think you say in your book that 1 out of 3 households in America had them. Is that right?
Yeah. So going into the writing of my book, I was, I grew up playing it and it was a big part of my childhood as it was yours. But I had no idea, like, from a financial and business standpoint, how successful it was. It was in 1 in every 3 homes in America. And I was looking at a list of the top 30 toys in 1989, and 25 of the 30 were either Nintendo games or Nintendo related products, which is just like incredible. They weren't just, the leader in the industry. They had over 95% of the industry. And, I put up a little photo on Twitter last week where Nintendo actually took out an ad saying there's no such thing as a Nintendo. There's a Nintendo Entertainment System. There's Nintendo games, but basically don't use our name to become synonymous with video games, because it really was that synonymous that they were already defending their trademark. And that's pretty ironic to look at now, because I'm sure Nintendo would love to be the jacuzzi of video games.
It's funny. It's funny because, we all like sort of fixated on video games because of the Nintendo Entertainment System. But it's like now it's like, fuck Nintendo. Who cares? Like, like, I mean, their systems that they have now, like I haven't played a Nintendo system in ages. Like, I mean, since basically the PlayStation 1 came around, like I haven't played a Nintendo since then. And, of course, I mean, obviously PC gaming and all kind, there's all kinds of other gaming now as well. But I mean, yeah, just Nintendo, like I don't care. And it's sad. It makes me sad.
Yeah, but I mean, speaking of PC gaming, though, I mean, because I grew up as a PC gamer, and like people just like made fun of me, right? Because like nobody else had a computer, and it was just seeing it, like playing computer games was seen as something kind of weird. And it really seems to me that the Nintendo Entertainment System was the thing that really made gaming something that everyone was doing. It totally mainstreamed it.
Well, it made it accessible because, like it says, it's an entertainment system. It's not gaming. I mean, even though that's exactly what it is, but just how they branded it showed that they were trying to get into more households that way, as opposed to sort of, sectioning it off as being like, this is what computer nerds are into.
And not just, I don't think it made it more accessible, but I feel like I remember in, say, 1990, my memories are a little hazy as a kid, but computers were very nerdy things, felt very 1984, felt very distant from me. And then by 1995, a personal computer felt like a normal thing to have. And I do feel like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis was a big part of that acceptance of, okay, here's a lot of electronic things that we can control, have fun with. And like, we know how to play them and use them, whereas our parents maybe don't. And that was kind of a nice aspect to it.
Well, I mean, Allison, you mentioned that they didn't call it a gaming system; they called it an entertainment system. And I never knew this, but in this movie you were in, Video Games the Movie, they said that they did that intentionally, and that they had like the robot somehow was part of that, of not making it seem like a gaming system.
I'll be honest, I did not know that until I watched the movie. And I was like, that's the great thing about this film, Video Games the Movie, is that even if you're a hardcore gamer, there's still a ton of stuff that you can learn from watching this thing. And what I didn't realize, probably because we were all too young to know that this had happened, was that Atari basically bombed with an E.T. game. And it was such an awful failure that it basically scared off anyone from being part of the video game industry. So when Nintendo released their system, they didn't want to be associated with video games. And that's why they called it an entertainment system. And they felt like they had to add on all these accessories. So it wasn't that you were just buying a console. You were getting the Duck Hunt gun, and you were getting this little robot dude, and which I don't even know what that guy did. I don't think I ever saw one of those in real life. No,
you guys are totally right. He had absolutely no purpose. He was, like Allison said, he was just a Trojan horse to make this thing not an Atari 2600 or ColecoVision. And I was speaking with the original salesman who would go into New York for Nintendo's test launch, and they had this robot. And, they talked about how cool he was, Rob the robot, but he didn't even work, that they always pretended like they didn't have batteries or that the model didn't work. It was really just like smoke and mirrors. And if you factor that in, this was, say, 1985, and then 5 years later, Nintendo is 95% of this $5 billion industry. It's just amazing to think, their own little David and Goliath struggle to resurrect this video game industry. And then they're sort of the Goliath in this David and Goliath story. And, there's so much that goes on in such a short amount of time. That's why, I'm psyched that Video Games the Movie documentary came out, and that people are starting to look more into this industry and appreciate it for all the rich history.
I actually played that E.T. game that Allison mentioned, and having played it, I have no trouble understanding how it completely destroyed the entire video game industry.
Wow, really?
Oh yeah, you can't even imagine how bad that game is. I mean, the guy, he made it in 4 weeks or something.
Yeah. So, I was curious about what made it bad. Was it just terrible gameplay, or did things not work?
Well, no, my experience of it was you would just walk around, and then you would fall into a pit, and you couldn't figure out how to get out of the pit. And that was the whole game.
So I wrote this book, and I made this documentary, and we talked about how bad it was, and then I finally played it, and I felt like, man, I didn't even do justice to how bad it was. It's the gameplay, I guess, is fine. It's really just, there's no goal to the story. You just walk around, and you do fall in this pit, and then you make your head bigger, and then you come out of it. And then sometimes this guy in a yellow jacket chases you around, and then sometimes he gets you, and then nothing happens. So I can see why this game destroyed the industry. It was just awful.
But so Blake, how did we go from that though to, the first round of Nintendo games were so good. I mean, Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda, and Metroid were just like perfect games. And how did we go from like these Atari games, which I played all of them, they were mostly all terrible, to some of these like incredibly polished games just a few years later?
Combat was not a terrible game.
Okay. Three of the 89 modes in combat were pretty good.
That was my favorite game ever.
I mean, it's just, I guess in the 2 years or 3 years since the industry kind of crashed, Nintendo just kept going, and they were able to break through technologically. But even when they did have those great games that you mentioned, or the percentage of great games that you mentioned, the guys would go into the stores and nobody would want to sell video games because they didn't care if it was the greatest thing in the world. These guys had their jobs because the person before them had gotten fired for losing so much money on video games. The perception was that video games were a fad, and that seems kind of silly in hindsight. But I can kind of understand it because there was that personal computer revolution brewing, and I could see a world in which people said, okay, we don't need a dedicated console. You just got these computers are going to be in your home, so let's just make games for that. But Nintendo, to their credit, believed in their great games, and whether or not you like what they're doing these days, and I definitely don't like a lot of it, they still do make great games. That's always been their DNA and always what, has saved them or what they've clung to when times are tough.
But like the guys who made these games, I mean, did they have any? I mean, there couldn't have been many people with a background in game design. I mean, were these just like toy makers, or did they have some sort of background in game design to make The Legend of Zelda or Metroid or something?
Well, something that the documentary touches on is that the genius thing that these people did with these games is that they realized that people liked playing as a character, because no Atari game really did that. You were like a nameless gun shooting aliens out of the sky, or a little paddle that had to hit a ball back and forth. And the reason Nintendo's, like you said, first generation of games with Super Mario Brothers and Zelda and all that is because you actually got to play as a character. You actually got to be a hero that you could see on the screen.
Yeah, that was a huge part of it. They added like a story value to this, so you felt like, I didn't just need to help this dot cross the street. I needed to help Mario save the princess, and that was, whether it was a reason or just a good excuse to keep picking it up, that kept you going, and it sort of took things to another level.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the Nintendo games were really, I mean, they started introducing stories, and particularly Ninja Gaiden sticks out in my memory as being the first game I really played, the first console game I really played with a really in-depth story and all these sort of film noir cutscenes and things like that. How important do you guys think that game was to the development of stories in games?
I had never really thought about it before, but I do think looking back it was, because the cutscenes now are such a big part of the game. And even as much as Nintendo or games like Mario, Donkey Kong, Zelda kind of told a story, they didn't really tell that much of a story. They kind of let you interpret a lot. But in that game, with those scenes, they do sort of have the author tell you, kind of guide it in their direction. And I think that really helped progress things as well.
Well, I also think that kind of ties into the fact that it was supposed to be an entertainment system. It wasn't just a game where you did every action. It also made you feel like you had a story and that you were in a way watching a movie, and being entertained passively as well as actively.
Yeah, and also, in terms of Nintendo's new lexicon for trying to distance themselves, I kind of remembered now that the games were called game packs. They weren't game cartridges or video games. It was game packs. And they also tried to introduce other things. Like they did introduce a knitting machine that was terribly unsuccessful. And in 1991, they tried to introduce a lottery in Minnesota where you could go online and actually play the lottery from your NES, which got shut down by the state government in Minnesota. But they really did sort of always envision it as this like Trojan horse into like your kind of what the Xbox One is today, like your one central hub. And they tried to do it with 8 bits.
Did you say a knitting machine?
There was a Nintendo knitting machine.
What?
Well, the thing was, I think that everyone that bought it, they did like that Men in Black thing, and they made you erase memory. But there are ads out there for the Nintendo knitting machine.
Wow.
Yeah, that went away a little bit faster than Rob the Robot did.
Well, I mean, there were a lot of misbegotten peripherals for the NES, right? I mean, there was the Power Glove, and there was something where it was supposed to detect the movements of your hands, right? And it didn't really work.
Yeah,
there was like a 3D thing, wasn't there?
Really? I remember the glove.
The glove was in the movie The Wizard, and it was.
I was going to say The Wizard. How genius is that? That like Nintendo basically did create an entire movie. About their own console. And they introduced Super Mario Brothers 3 through that movie.
Oh, did they? I didn't know that.
Yeah. It hadn't come out yet. That's how they let the world know that there was going to be a Super Mario Brothers 3.
Huh.
No, you're totally right, because this was, before the internet, where you didn't know what was happening until it actually happened. I mean, movie trailers, that concept never occurred to me. It was like, until it was in your store that one day, it didn't exist, except Mario 3, we knew 9 months in advance this thing was coming, and it was probably my favorite game before I ever even played it, just because I loved it so much.
Yeah.
Although I will say I did obsessively read video game magazines when I was a kid, like Electronic Gaming Monthly and...
I had Nintendo Power, for sure.
Yeah, Nintendo Power.
Okay, sure, yeah. And I don't remember the names of the other ones. I know Electronic Gaming Monthly was one that I turned to frequently.
Well, Allison, you mentioned Nintendo Power, and I have very fond memories of that. Do you want to just talk about that magazine a little bit?
Well, I have I wish I wasn't in the middle of moving because I just packed up all my Nintendo Powers because I have issue like 26 to 153 or something like that. And I keep them in a bookcase where I have them all lined up so the bindings make the pictures, which I thought was the coolest thing as a kid.
Oh, wow.
You know? But they were just, you know, they gave you all the like sweet hints, cool Easter eggs you might not have known about, which I think back in the day, we didn't even call them Easter eggs, you know? Mm-hmm. They were just like these special surprises that you could find in games. And then if you were a subscriber like I was, and you got sent the strategy guide. So I have like a Final Fantasy strategy guide. I'm pretty sure I have a Super Mario Brothers 3 strategy guide. And my brother and I would just sit there and like this. I'm pretty sure this is why I'm a completionist. Because when you get a strategy guide, it tells you where to get everything. And I refused to like finish a game without getting everything I could possibly get according to the strategy guide.
I mean, the thing I remember most about Nintendo Power is they had a make your own game contest, and I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna enter this," and then I never did. But it's just as well that I never did because the guy who won his thing was so much better than anything I could have even imagined doing. And I wonder what happened. Does anyone know what happened to that guy? Does anyone know the contest I'm talking about?
I do not know that contest, but I do remember. You know, my earliest Nintendo memory was opening it up, but my favorite Nintendo memory was when Mario 2 came out, and I so desperately wanted that game. And back then, you know, getting a video game not for a birthday or Christmas was just like impossible, unless you could trick a grandparent into it. And I remember I came up with this brilliant idea where I was like, oh, I'll just get a piece of cardboard and I'll draw the game and then I can play it. And just that I like would have bet my life this would work. And then I remember putting it into the system and it was just like nothing. And but I remember in that one moment where I drew the first level and I thought, man, I could just do this for every game. Maybe I can even make up my own game. This is such a great thing. But that didn't turn out. But no, I don't remember that contest. But I am curious.
Well, I actually remember when Super Mario Brothers 2 came out, my grandma drove me to the, like it was like a supermarket or something. Or no, what was it? Like I don't know, some sort of department store. And there was a whole group of people all camped outside, and we all, you know, we didn't know how many copies they were going to have, and so we all were all like, you know, when they opened the doors, we're all running through the aisles and elbowing each other, and you know, trying to race to get the. And that was the first time I'd ever seen any kind of like line like that to get a video game. You know, it was pretty crazy.
Oh, you know, speaking of strategy guides, did you guys ever like call like a 1-800 number to get hints? Like I did that several times I can recall, and it was always super frustrating.
Gosh, yes, I think I totally remember doing that.
I definitely called several different times, and it was always exercise in frustration because you had to like, you know, go through the damn phone system, and then you had to wait, and they're trying to milk you for all the time on the phone as they can, and but you know, sometimes you're stuck, and you got to do something to get unstuck, and I mean, they didn't have strategy guides for every game, so sometimes that was your only recourse.
And the funny thing is that, like, the Nintendo Power that we remember fondly, and the game counselors, which had that phone line, which I guess we have mixed memories on, especially when they started charging money, like, those were actually Nintendo's conscious business decisions to avoid the Atari ET disaster. They thought, you know, the whole thing happened there because nobody cared about the consumer, because they just thought, we can throw out any crap and they're going to play this game. So they wanted to make sure that the consumer was always having a great experience, while also sort of like a drug addict, keeping them a little bit hooked, or a drug dealer, I should say. But it's funny to think that those, like, because of that failure, that's why we have so many of those things that really made the Nintendo experience that much more extensive.
How about the Game Genie?
Oh my God, the Game Genie.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Isn't it crazy that we don't really have stuff like that anymore? Like, we don't give ourselves the ability to cheat like that.
Well, why do we need a Game Genie anymore when we have steroids in baseball and everything like that? I mean, that's what it was, right? It was just steroids for video games.
Well, it's almost just like because there was no real way to save a lot of your games. Remember, you'd have to like leave your system on and turn off your TV so it wouldn't burn into the screen if you wanted to not lose your place in the game.
Yeah.
So Game Genie always kind of gave you the ability to like cheat, so you didn't have to keep stopping and turning the game off and starting over.
You know what? I think half the reason that we actually have progressed to the point where we can just save games wherever we want, basically, is because so much of the video game buying public now is adults. And adults can't just keep playing a video game. They can't be like required to get to a certain point in a video game, because they have lives. They have to go to jobs and stuff. You know? So it's like, whereas a kid can be beholden to this video game until whatever, but you know. Adults won't stand for it though, so I think that's part of the reason. I mean, of course, obviously, memory getting smaller and cheaper and everything is a factor, but I think that was
and because we're all scared to burn images into our TV screens.
well, John. I mean, I used to, later, these emulators came out for the NES, so you could go back and play all these old NES games and actually save and reload as much as you want. And I was like, I can't believe there's only 40 minutes of content in this game. I spent thousands of hours playing it.
Right.
But they were like, you would just have this little tiny game that was incredibly hard and made you replay huge sections of it over and over again.
Has anyone here ever gotten past level 2 in Adventure Island? Because I swear I've never seen anything further in that game. And that was one of the only games that there was no Game Genie cheats for it.
I don't think I even played that one. I in preparation for the panel, I was looking at some lists online of like the top 100 NES games and all that, and sparking some memories and everything. And I saw that one on a number of lists, and I don't even remember that one.
Oh gosh, you were like a little caveman kind of dude.
Was that on the skateboard?
But for some reason, you rode a skateboard. And you basically couldn't replenish your health in any way. So you got hit 3 times and you were dead, and you only got 3 lives. And that was it. Like I've never seen anyone get past level 2.
Okay, wait. Have you guys played Ghosts and Goblins?
Mm-hmm.
Because that game is effing impossible. Like it's the most frustrating and impossible game I think I've ever encountered. Like, okay, so you're this guy and you have this little suit of armor, and if you get hit, you lose your armor and you run around in your underwear. And if you get hit again, you're dead. And you have to go through I swear, every section of this game is completely impossible. And if you make it to the end, apparently, from what I've read, you have to start over at level 4 and do them all again, because it turns out that the whole second half of the game was a dream created by Satan.
Ha!
Oh my gosh.
Classic.
Well, let me ask you guys, the games, I do remember so much, like spending 5 hours to beat like one level or even more than that. Do you think that it was because the games didn't have the ability to save and that kind of thing? Or do you think it's just because we didn't really know how to play video games that much? Because, I played Mario 1 a month or so ago, and without the saving, I at least did it significantly better than I did as a kid. And it's because like I'm used to controlling a platformer. I'm used to this kind of.
Well, is it that, or is it because something like Mario Brothers, like we know where everything is in that game because it's just not nearly as massive as the games we play. It's almost like you're always going to remember your childhood phone number. I'm always going to know where all those hidden blocks are in Mario Brothers, so we don't think when we go through it anymore. We're able to just kind of breeze through.
And when I was a kid, I never, like, all the, like, little candles in Castlevania or all the little candles in Ninja Gaiden. I'm sure, like, now I would actually write down what they all are and figure out the optimum strategy for what I should get to get through each section. But as a kid, I never had the patience for that shit. But I'm sure the games are a lot more, it's a lot more feasible to beat them if you actually figure out all those power-ups and everything. But Ninja Gaiden 2 haunts me because that's like the one game I spent the most time trying to beat and never could. I made it up to the second last boss, but I could never beat him.
The other thing is that I realized with games back then is it was hard to know when they actually ended. Like I think we didn't know when there was a goal. Like I spent one Christmas probably like 4 or 5 years ago. My cousin and I were like, you know what? Let's see how Rampage ends. Do you remember Rampage, where you're Godzilla?
Yeah.
Some other, and you're King Kong, right? And you're just tearing down a city. We were like, because I don't feel like I know anyone who ever finished Rampage, because every level was basically the same thing. It just took a little bit longer. And so Brian, my cousin, and I were like, we're just going to sit down and we're going to beat Rampage until it ends. And I am not joking you. We played for 7 or 8 straight hours of just tearing down the same looking buildings over and over and over again. And then at one point, we finished tearing down buildings, the whole screen kind of flashes, and then it's a black screen and it says, congratulations. And then it starts over. That's all it does. We played the game for 7 hours to find that out. So I feel like there was a lot of games back then when you didn't quite know where your goal point was.
Yeah, no, I can remember that a lot of games like just had completely lackluster endings, and like you felt like ripped off when you get to the end of it because you're like, pfft. It's like I just fought my way through all of this, and then I get nothing. There's nothing. It's just like I just get to see credits and stuff, and it was always kind of just lackluster and disappointing.
But in hindsight, didn't it prepare us well for life? It's like, all right, you won.
Yeah.
Next thing.
Too real.
I always kind of hope that after I beat a game, I felt like Nintendo should send me like a certificate in the mail. Though I don't know how that would have actually worked.
I took a picture of my kill screen when I beat DuckTales and sent it to Nintendo Power, and they sent me back a letter saying congratulations. And that was one of my like gaming crowning moments.
Wow. Speaking of DuckTales, like how the hell did that work? Like I don't understand. Like that primitive technology seems like magical to me. Like they had a gun that you could fire at your television and it registered when you actually hit a duck.
No, that's Duck Hunt.
Duck Hunt. Yeah, what did you say?
No, DuckTales.
Oh, DuckTales. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was on Duck Hunt. But yeah, so but seriously, how did Duck Hunt work? That I don't understand it. Like how did it know?
Was something about the duck was actually like a different. There was something about the one pixel in the duck was like a completely black pixel. I'm kind of making this up, but it has something to do with one of the pixels in the duck.
No,
and the
that's
gun
kind of right.
Registered when you hit that pixel.
How did it know? How did the
There
duck
was
know the
something in the gun
know?
that flashed. It was like a flashlight could register it.
That seems like magic.
Yeah.
The thing was, like, Nintendo, they didn't really get into the arcade business or the home video game business until like 1977 or 78 or so. And before that, they had like these clay laser shooting things in bowling alleys. So it was kind of like the Duck Hunt game, but it was like supposed to be in a bowling alley. It was like a big center you would go to. So I think that's where the original technology for them having that, but it definitely blew my mind. And until I realized you can just go right up to the screen, and kill them very easily.
It's like shooting ducks in a barrel.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but you know what game had the best ending ever, though? It was Bionic Commando. That's like my total highlight of playing NES games was beating Bionic Commando and shooting Hitler with a missile on the first try. And with all my friends watching, and it was just, and then you have to escape from the complex, and then he runs back in and you're freaking out. And no, that's my all-time favorite game is Bionic Commando for the NES. How about you guys? What's your all-time favorite NES games?
I think
many.
I
Go
think
ahead,
as a
Allison.
series overall, Mario Kart. It's just, it's still a game that I can go back to any generation of that game and have fun playing.
Yeah, Mario Kart's awesome. I think Mario 3, like I said, from the Wizard, like that just had such a special place in my heart, because I had those like 9 months to really want it. And then the other game that I loved so much was Bubble Bobble, because that was one of the few games that my brother and I could play like cooperatively. And he always wanted to be like play together. Even later on when we get like the sports games, he always wanted to be on my team instead of play against me, which I thought was ridiculous. But in that game, it was really fun. And that would probably be my favorite game for the NES. Did you guys play Bubble Bobble ever?
I don't know if I did. I saw that on one of the lists of top 100 games and whatever, and I didn't remember it.
It's this game where you're like a little cute alien creature, and there's little monsters on a screen, and you blow bubbles at them, which traps them, and then you pop it, and they turn into fruit. So it's very logical.
So for me, my favorite probably would be the Zelda series. Like Legend of Zelda was huge for me when I first discovered it, and the Adventure of Link also. Like and that actually, the Adventure of Link it was sort of my saddest memory from my video game years when I was a kid, because I was playing the game and I was maybe halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, and our house got robbed. And our house actually got robbed 3 times in the span of like a month or two. And the first time the robbers didn't take my Nintendo or any of my games, but then the second time they took it, and they took all my games, and so I lost all my progress on the Adventure of Link. So that was like the dagger.
Where did you live that you get robbed 3 times in a month?
I lived in Florida, and we lived in this town where it was like we were way on the outskirts of where it hadn't really been developed yet. So it was like we had like one house on my street, my house. It was the only house on my street. And there's just like a bunch of empty lots all around us. And we were right next to the like I-95, so like people could like drive by and see that there was no cars in front of our house, and so it wasn't very good. It wasn't very secure.
So to this day, have you ever beaten the Adventure of Link?
I did get it again, and I definitely played it a lot once I got it the second time. I don't remember if I finished it. I probably did, because I was pretty meticulous back then about these things. But yeah, that was a real blow, though. It's like it wasn't even that I lost the Nintendo; it was that I lost all my progress on Adventure of Link.
But didn't some small part of you take some solace in the fact that the robber with his family could like brag that he was 3/4 of the way through, and they were none the wiser?
Honestly, I never empathized with him in that way.
That's probably what happened. Is first he stole a Nintendo that it was like someone was only a quarter of the way through, and he's like, "Crap, I got to rob another house because I need a Adventure of the Link where someone's made a little bit more progress." But I was gonna say about Zelda, I had my most like ego bruising experience with Zelda was I had beaten this. Like after you beat the whole game, there's the second quest, which is even harder, and I had beaten that. And then one of like this kid I knew, he couldn't figure out how to beat the last level in it. And so he was getting desperate. And this was, it was hard to like, there's no internet. You couldn't just look up the solutions to the games. And so he actually paid me $25 to come over to his house and show him how to beat the last level.
Oh my God.
And I couldn't, I couldn't figure it out. And we spent like 6 hours, I spent like 6 hours at his house trying to figure it out. And then finally I just had to go home. I had to give him his $25 back because I couldn't figure out which wall I was supposed to bomb or whatever.
Bogus.
I very distinctly remember I couldn't find the raft in the game, and I knew it was hidden in the level, and I knew that there was this kid in my class, Kirtan, who knew how to find the raft, and I wasn't friends with him, but I asked my mom, could I invite Kirtan over, and she said kind of suspiciously, like, don't you not like that kid? I said, I know, but he knows how to get the raft, and she said, all right, but this is like not a good way to go about making friends. But it really was back then, like the Nintendo, who had Sega and who had Nintendo, was like such a big part of choosing friendships and ending friendships.
Let's see, Blake, in the course of researching this book, did you turn up just any weird game trivia kinds of things? One thing I was going back through the old games, and I always thought that the cover of Metal Gear, that it kind of looked like Michael Biehn from Aliens. And then I actually discovered that the artist just took a publicity still of Michael Biehn from Aliens and just flat out copied everything in it and made that the cover of Metal Gear.
Wow.
There was all sorts of stories. I mean, I think just going back to Mario, to find out that he was named after the landlord of Segale Park, where Nintendo's offices were, and that guy's name was Mario Segale, so they called him Mario. And the reason that they did was because he was like this landlord who they never saw. They used to joke, did he exist? Did he not exist? And then this game came out and they thought it was going to be popular. So they said, let's make him the most popular guy in the world since he doesn't want anyone to know he exists.
Well, they won.
Yes, definitely.
Well, how about the fact that Mario 2 was actually some crazy Japanese game that they just stuck the Mario characters in? That's why it's so weird and out of place with the whole series.
Yeah, that was a really big, mind-blowing moment to find out that Mario 2 was really just Doki Doki Panic, but with these guys replacing them. And I kind of feel like or playing it again, Mario 2 is like really fun, though at the time it felt so different and kind of really much worse.
Yeah.
Did you guys like that game at the time, or was it the odd duck in the family?
I kind of like the fact that the characters actually did different things, and there were there was a strategy to picking which character would beat which level. That I dug about it.
Yeah, totally. I like, and then you could also pick like between levels too, so it wasn't like you were stuck with Princess or Luigi. You could vary it up.
Although the only time you use Toad is in the digging levels.
Yeah, definitely when that first came out, I thought I was really disappointed. But I think I got to like it more the more I played it. But I definitely, like the first time you jump on an enemy and he doesn't die, and you're just like, what the hell is going on here?
Oh, yeah.
I don't really remember Mario 2 that much, but, when I was, like I said, when I was looking up these different lists in prep for the panel, there was this one list that actually had, like, it was like the top 100 games that you could actually play in an emulator in your browser. And I was actually thinking, like, how funny it is that, like, Nintendo games have become so worthless that they're not only available to just get online for free, but you don't even need to download anything. You can just play it in your freaking browser. It's like, we've come so far. These things were amazing to us back in the day. And then now they're just like these little little tiny things that you just run in a browser. But I saw Mario 2 was on there, and I sort of clicked onto it because I didn't really remember it, and I kind of vaguely remember it, but I don't even know if I really played that one. I may have just missed that one somehow. I know, it seems impossible, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like blocking out the first 3 Star Wars movies.
Yeah. So I was just gonna say earlier that definitely, like, learning about the like behind the scenes in the games and why this guy looked like that, it kind of blew my mind. But the one that really changed the way I thought about it all was just learning about like what Nintendo did. Like, we talked about the Game Genie earlier, and Nintendo sued the company that made it, and it didn't come out for a really long time. And there was a back and forth for like 2 years because Nintendo didn't want anybody to be messing with their system and changing their products. And the same thing with like Blockbuster. Like, they sued Blockbuster and all the mom and pop rental shops because they didn't want games to be rented. So these were like all the things that really made me think there was something else going on behind the scenes that I had no idea about as a kid, that there was this other Nintendo that wasn't just the happy, joyful one.
Well, one thing you said, Blake, that really struck me is you said that the book that's most similar to yours is Game of Thrones.
Yes.
Oh my
Definitely.
gosh.
I mean, that's what it's all about. Like, when I got to the point where I realized that there was like no good guys or bad guys, that it really was just all these different houses with their own philosophies, and they all thought they were entitled to be the king of the mountain. So between Sony, Sega, Nintendo, and then even the third parties, it really felt like Game of Thrones. And just, when I wrote the Nintendo chapters, I felt like I genuinely hated Sega. And when I wrote the Sega chapters, I genuinely hated Nintendo. And it was just these great larger-than-life characters.
So which one is most like the Lannisters?
Yeah.
I mean, definitely Nintendo.
Oh.
Like, Nintendo has like the best balance sheet and financials possible, even though they've been doing terribly with the Wii U. I heard that they can still go 30 more years of having losses of $250 million a year because they just have this war chest. Though I guess maybe the Lannisters, spoiler alert, don't have that war chest. But they at least always pay their debts, and they sort of hold themselves a notch above. And you could say, okay, the Lannisters are kind of arrogant in that regard, but at the same time, they are a pretty impressive family. And Sega was more of these upstarts that I guess I liken more to the Stark family.
So is like Mario Tyrion, and Luigi is Jamie, and the princess is Cersei? Or...
I mean, I don't know what Luigi is. I always feel so bad. He just like totally got shafted. I don't really understand his whole role. Like, if my brother asked me to help him save a girl, I'd be like, okay, maybe like the first time I'll do this. But to just keep always helping my brother, like, wouldn't you lose respect for me? Like, what am I doing in my life?
I think the best sort of not description, but the best example of like what Luigi or who Luigi is in, the amazing movie Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah.
When someone asks for their name and Mario's like, I'm Mario. And he's like, what's your last name? Mario. And then he asks Luigi, what's his name? And he's like, Luigi. And he's like, what's your last name? Mario. And he's like, so let me get this straight. Is your name are Mario and Luigi Mario? And they're like, yeah, Luigi has Mario's last name.
Yeah, it's so sad.
So do you think there will ever be another Super Mario Brothers movie?
Only if John Leguizamo signs on.
There definitely should be. That's kind of like, the way you guys were talking about Nintendo earlier, that like you haven't played their games or picked up their systems in years. I think a lot of that is because they've done such a poor job, I guess intentionally, even with their like IPs and their characters. I think that whether it's, there's those of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s that are now in our 20s, 30s, and 40s, and we love Nintendo in that special way. But, we can only play Mario 2 and Mario 3 so much. They should try to like find a way to, I guess, age up those characters and use that nostalgia, but also sort of keep the story moving forward. And I feel like that would make me more likely to want to be part of the Nintendo-verse. So a movie would be a great way to do that. And, even like graphic novels, I feel like, or a TV show. My dream is to write the Shy Guys TV show. I'm hoping that they'll come up with that. But they have all these great characters, and, I'd love to see them do more with it. And I think that a movie is like a very logical step.
Actually, Blake, speaking of movies, why don't you tell us about some of the 2 movies that are in development based on your book?
Sure. So there's a documentary that I am directing with my business partner, Jonah Tulis, and that's being produced by Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg, and Scott Rudin. And then those 3 guys are also doing the feature film adaptation for Sony Pictures, with Seth and Evan are writing and directing, and Scott is producing. And we are in the middle of post-production on the documentary. We shot 15 interviews last year when I was writing the book. We just showed a cut to the guys last week that they really liked. And they are in New York for the summer, fall to shoot a movie that's at the shooting here. So we're going to get to work in their office starting next month and hopefully finish it up by the end of the year. And then sort of as we're finishing this up, Seth and Evan are going to start writing the script for the feature film, which, I did say Game of Thrones was the biggest inspiration, and that was kind of how I wrote it. But I think that on the screen, it'll be something more like the social network of video games, sort of this behind the scenes story of the people who made this happen and the betrayals and alliances that made it happen.
I mean, is there a particular character it's going to focus on?
I can't speak for how they're going to, do it on the screen in their feature. But in the book, like definitely the focal point is Tom Kalinske, who was the CEO of Sega of America from 1990 to 96. And before we even started talking about his time at Sega, I realized this guy is the adult most responsible for my childhood other than my parents. He helped resurrect the Barbie line at Mattel, and then he did for boys what Barbie did for girls with He-Man Masters of the Universe, and all sorts of other toys like Popples, which I loved, and then he went to Matchbox.
Popples!
So he was
gosh, I haven't thought about them in ages.
Yeah, so the guy behind that sort of like lost his job due to internal politics, and he's on a beach in Hawaii in 1990, sort of down on his luck, trying to figure out if there's ever going to be a good opportunity in his life. He's getting a little bit older, and then he's approached on the beach by this short, tyrannical Japanese man named Hayao Nakayama, who is the president of Sega Enterprises, and he says, "Tom, I've been looking for you." And Tom says, "What are you doing here?" He says, "I wanted to find you so that you can come run Sega and take on Nintendo." And Tom said, "I don't really even know anything about video games. I don't even know what Sega is. What is this?" And then he was enticed to go to Japan in the middle of his family vacation, saw the 16-bit technology, saw what this was all about, and saw a chance to, find the greatness that he had once had by taking on Nintendo. And it was a Herculean task that he was able to pull off. So I always felt like that was the central character for me that made this a great story for gamers and non-gamers alike, the one that even my parents who don't know anything about video games could follow along with, a guy sort of middle-aged trying to have his one last chance in this David and Goliath story.
But, although our panel here is focused on Nintendo, I have to say, if there was a video game system in my heart, it would be a Sega Genesis rather than Nintendo.
Oh.
Wow.
Console wars!
I actually, John, when the Genesis came out, I wanted it more than anything, and I just begged and begged and begged my parents. They never got it for me, and a lot of my friends had the same experience. Our parents were like, "Oh, we already bought a Nintendo. We're not buying another game system." And one of my friends, his parents actually said, like, the G word is banned from this house. And we're just not allowed to use the word Genesis in this house anymore because we had all begged for it so much.
When I got my Genesis, I did have to do some convincing as well, but it was my first semester of high school as a freshman, and I suspected that I was about to get straight A's, and I had never done that before. And so I went to my mom and I said, "Mom, if I get straight A's this semester, can I get a Genesis for Christmas?" And so she said yes, and then I did, and then so I got it. So it was a bit of a gamble on my part, because what if I didn't get the straight A's? But it worked out, and then I never got straight A's ever again.
Worth it.
Yeah, because you already had a Genesis, so why bother?
Yeah,
right?
so fuck it. I mean, plus I didn't spend any time studying because I was playing Genesis. So.
My cousins had a Genesis, so whenever we needed our fix, we would go over to their house and play.
Actually, Allison, I saw that you basically owe your whole career to a Nintendo controller necklace that you bought.
Yeah, actually, I didn't buy it. It was given to me as a gift, so thanks to that friend. But I was living in LA and I was acting, but as most actors do, they have second jobs, and I was bartending. And one night I was wearing that Nintendo remote control necklace, and a guy who worked in development at G4 came in and sat at my bar and asked me about it. And I was like, "Oh, I've played video games since I was like 5. And he's like, "But you're a girl." And I'm like, "Yep, I am." And he's like, "We need to talk." And he sat at my bar for like 2 hours and asked me questions about video games and all sorts of nerdy stuff. And then he was convinced that I needed to be on their network. So he got me a meeting with the head of development at G4, not development, the head of talent at G4. And lo and behold, here I am 7 years later going on podcasts talking about video games.
Well, what do you think, Allison, what do you think it is about the stigma of being a girl with games. I mean, I don't think there's anything about playing Mario that made me feel like this was a uniquely boy experience, but video games have sort of historically, and especially back then, were more for guys. Why do you think that was?
I honestly don't know. I feel like I have a feeling that because computer games kind of attracted a techier and nerdier crowd for the most part, and that tended to be guys more than girls.
Right.
And I know growing up, like the girls in my class were way more interested in learning how to ride horses than playing video games. And I just wasn't interested in horses for whatever reason. I was definitely like the oddball in that sense. So I played video games, but I don't think there's something innately male about video games, which is why, these days when we have the term girl gamer, it kind of makes me cringe a little. I just feel like for whatever reason, girls growing up kind of, at least in my generation, took interest in other things. But, we're popping up. There's now more of us. And I think girls growing up now are much more attracted to video games than they were when I was growing up.
That's funny that you weren't interested in horses and you're now playing a unicorn on TV.
I'm not joking. Horses terrify me. I'm from Tewksbury, New Jersey, and it's a part of New Jersey that's known for training Olympic champion horses. Like, horses is a lifestyle where I'm from. And I would go to horse farms and like pet horses, but any of my friends who tried to put me on a horse, I was so terrified of this like beast underneath me that was going to throw me to the ground that I just never wanted to take a riding lesson. But now I'm an actor, so I can pretend, and that's why I get to play a unicorn.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to just tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a pilot that we shot for Adult Swim called I always say the name wrong. It's the Team Unicorn Saturday Action Fun Hour, which is funny because should our show go, it will probably be on like a Tuesday night, and it's only going to be 15 minutes, so nothing in the title is accurate. But it's a show. What? It is definitely fun. I will give you that. And it does involve Team Unicorn. So, but it's Claire Grant and Riley Vanderbilt created this Team Unicorn team, a few years ago, and they've done a lot of online videos and had a lot of success with that, and then sold this pilot concept to Adult Swim. And it's basically an homage to all the Saturday morning cartoons we grew up with. So, for example, G.I. Joe always started off with like Mr. T coming on and being like, kids, are you dealing with bullying at home? Here's how the Joes handle it. And then you watch your episode, and then he comes back on at the end and is like, so talk to your parents if you're dealing with bullying. It's the same idea. We have that live action us at the beginning and the end, and then it's a cartoon in the middle. The difference is, though, it's just we give really terrible advice to children. And it's all very violent and inappropriate and hilarious. And it's a show that I would watch if I was not a part of it, which is always a good sign. So we should be finding out soon, within the next month or so, if we are going to series, which I hope we do, because it's the type of show that I want everyone to see.
Awesome. Good luck. That sounds great.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
I was going to say, speaking of girl gamers, I watched the video games documentary the other night with my wife and my sister-in-law, who are both gamers, and it took us like 3 or 4 hours to actually watch the documentary because we just kept pausing it because we would get into conversations. We're like, oh my god, do you remember this, and this? And it was just like going down memory lane, and it was a little different because my wife and I are similar ages, but then my sister-in-law is like 24, so she's much younger than us, and but she still had, that sort of video game experience. And of course, I mean, the documentary talks about more than NES, but still, it was just funny that we couldn't get more than like 5 minutes before we had to pause it and just have a conversation.
No, that's the best part of this whole subject matter. I spent 3.5 years working on the book and documentary, and I'm still working on it. And I have not met a single person between 20 and 50 that didn't immediately respond to me talking about the project with their own personal memory. Mm-hmm. And I sort of likened it to the JFK assassination, but the kind of like upbeat version where like everybody you mention it to has their own story of like where they were. It's like, oh, we asked our parents for this. We couldn't get this. We got the little ticket at Toys R Us, but then we got the game. So it's just amazing. It was such a great part of our lives that, in the pre-internet era when we all didn't have something in common, we had this And it was in 1 in 3 homes, and that was kind of like our common currency. And it's nice to realize, oh man, we were all at that same party, and we can talk about it now.
Yeah, and the thing is like, even if there's plenty of people these days who are our age who don't play games, who would never consider themselves gamers, but you know that at some point in their childhood they did. It's I don't know a single person who didn't maybe not own a Nintendo, but at least played one at their neighbor's house.
See, Allison, I mean, we mentioned that you were in Video Games the Movie. Is there any other video game stuff that you've been involved with lately that you want to let people know about?
I feel like you're asking me that because I should have an answer to it, but I can't think of anything right now. No, I'm not doing anything specifically with video games at the moment besides playing them. Although I will be going down to Comic-Con next weekend, obviously. And I'm co-hosting a SiriusXM show called Geek Time for 2 hours. And we will be talking about video games for a portion of that, just talking about what's going on in the industry right now and what's being represented at Comic-Con and that kind of stuff.
And so how would I, like, if I wanted to listen to that, how would I find it?
I believe it will be on Sirius 101. So if you need to have Sirius, which I highly recommend. I have Sirius. It's so funny. I shouldn't tell Sirius this, but like, I bought a new car a couple years ago and it came with 6 months of free Sirius. And I was like, I'm never, whatever. Who would pay for radio in their car? That's so silly. But I started listening to it, and then 6 months go by, and they're like, your subscription's up. And I'm like, take all my money. All I need is Sirius in my life. So I actually highly recommend Sirius, even though it sounds like a plug because I'm working for them. I don't normally work for them.
Well, let's see. And speaking for plugs, John, you want to plug your new book, Press Start to Play?
Sure, yeah. So I co-edited it with Daniel H. Wilson, and it's going to be coming out from Vintage in like fall 2015. And we have a bunch of great people lined up for it, like Shawnee McGuire and Robin Wasserman, Veronica Belmont, Hugh Howey, and then so those sort of Ernie Klein, who wrote Ready Player One, and so those are sort of people that are like, well, okay, you might expect them to be writing stories for this, but then we also got a bunch of game developers. So we got like Chris Avallone and Mark Laidlaw and Ted Kosmatka and Brianna Pratchett. So it was really exciting to get people like that, taking a step away from actually writing video games and actually just writing some prose stories. And the whole idea is to write stories that are inspired by video games in some way. So whether it's, stories that sort of replicate the experience of playing a video game in prose form, or, sort of science fiction or fantasy stories that sort of take video games, and sort of warp the reality around them so that, you interact with the video game in real life or something like that. But, so yeah, it's, we don't really have stories, in hand for it yet because the deadline's still far away, but, it's going to be cool, I think. One of the things we suggested to the authors is that they pick story titles from this list of things that we came up with. So we wanted, because like really what I imagined as the perfect table of contents would just like read like a list of video game terms. So like a story might be called Save Point, and one might be called First Person Shooter, and one might be called Respawn or something like that. And I just thought that would be really cool. And so like I know a couple of them are at least thinking about it. And Shawnee McGuire's story, she already turned in, actually it's called Survival Horror. So that was one of the ones we had in mind. I'm really hoping someone's going to write a story called "You Have Died of Dysentery," just for the for the old school gamers, So yeah, I think it's going to be fun.
All right, cool. So that's just about all our time. Do you guys have anyone want to throw in any final thoughts about the legacy of the original Nintendo Entertainment System? Or
yeah, actually, what I just thought of is. I think growing up, a lot of our parents were always like, you should stop playing games and go outside and play and that kind of thing. And I'll always remember that for whatever reason, my mother loved Dr. Mario. Do you remember? It was basically like Tetris kind of, but with Mario characters. And my mom would come in and be like, you kids should go play for 30 minutes and I can play Dr. Mario. And she would like take over the console just so she could play Dr. Mario. And I feel like it's just such a good example of how Nintendo really does make games for the family, and they really were all about like being an entertainment system for a household, which is pretty incredible.
And now like people will tell their people who grew up with games are going to say, don't go out and play Nintendo.
Yeah.
But yeah, my final thought too. I don't care what the experts say. I think blowing on the cartridge absolutely works.
And that was our panel. For more interviews and panels, visit us at geeksguideshow.com. Thanks.